thank you all for coming. It's really, really great to look out and see how many of you have wanted to come and listen to our panel. It's really great to see colleagues, friends, community members. I'm so glad that you're here, and thank you, John, for that really compelling talk. You're really powerful speaker, and it's hard to follow that up. And I think I just want to make a long story short, and I think that's why you're all here. Whose land is it? It's ours. Thank you for coming. Actually, when I thought about that and I was sharing what I might say to a friend of mine from the Heiltsuk Nation, he's a hereditary chief. He's been a longtime friend of mine, and I told him what I was going to say, and he corrected me. He said, "No, it belongs to our grandchildren, and we're just taking care of it for them." And so I wanted to share that with all of you. He doesn't have grandchildren, I don't have grandchildren, but and I think that's a teaching. We think about those future generations when we make decisions and when we relate to the land. It's about as much as the past as it is the future. And I think the paper that we're presenting to you all today and publishing kind of reflects that a little bit. John and I, we were sort of reflecting on how we sort of came to this point. I think it became we met around the time of that Douglas Treaty Conference and got to talking, and we realized what we're sharing with you is really important. And as John said, it's as important today as it was a year ago, as it always has been for the last 160 plus years, I guess. I think what I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to probably keep it pretty brief, is essentially sharing with you, and what I'm sharing through the paper is basically what I've really learned. Part of my learning journey, I think, started with my master's in Indigenous governance. Jeff, you could probably remember this. It really was about taking my learning journey back into the community and learning about something that the community really wanted me to pursue, and that is to articulate and put some words to what does it mean to fishers formally, because that's something that we sort of hold on to as a sort of a treaty arrangement with the Douglas Treaty. That's where I was able to spend some time learning from especially my late Uncle Earl, Claxton Sr., Ilquetza, and spending time with him was really about where I guess my journey started, learning really what it meant to be a Saanich person. He shared so much about the reef net fishery, the language, and I guess the relationship to our natural world through that practice. And then my learning journey continued into the PhD, where I spent probably a lot much more time with Siam Estates, Jasinkton, and that learning journey continued when we were able to teach together, teaching a course called Land and Language, I guess probably for the last 7 years. So for me, it's been such an honor and a privilege to spend that much time with my uncle, learning about our relationship to the land, especially through the language and the worldview that comes from it. And that's what I wanted to share, just some highlights with you all. So if we're talking about rethinking the notions of sovereignty, what does sovereignty mean from the Saanich perspective? So just some examples, and I think Uncle could probably talk much, and he does talk much more eloquently about this, but I just wanted to offer some of what I've learned about particularly responsibility, relationship, and ownership to the land through the lens of the language. When we talk about scales, which is our laws and our beliefs together, I think that encompasses what we would consider, I guess, our concept of sovereignty. It comes through the language. It's a sacred obligation, comes from the Creator. And they were understood to be laws just as much as the Canadian courts refers to their laws as laws. That's how significant they were for us. When we talk about the land and when we think about relating to the world through the language, Uncle John has taught me so much about how, while when we consider terminology, there's oftentimes sort of a dual meaning to it. And one example of that is our word for land, which is tanu. And that word could mean land, could mean soil or earth. But the deeper meaning, when we really look at the language, and I have to acknowledge that I am a language learner. I'm only learning the language. It was basically sort of informally through my sort of academic journey, being able to spend some time with Uncle. So I've never taken a Sanchothan language class. My first language was English. I remember sitting with Uncle Earl, and I was doing my research, and I always put research in quotations, and we were having sort of this challenging time. You could see he was contemplating, thinking deeply, almost struggling. And he says, you know what the problem is? I think in Sanchothan, and you think in English. And he was translating everything for me and conveying that information. And an example of that is that word, tanu. Could be land, could be earth, could be soil. But actually it means my wish for the people. And that really expresses the depth of our relationship to the land. Whose wish? It's the Creator's wish. Creator's wish for us, for us to be able to be here, to exist, to live with dignity. That's a word that Uncle John uses a lot in our homelands. And that's what we consider to be our sovereignty, our nationhood. It's that connection to the land. And we understood that to be respected when James Douglas tried to negotiate what he thought was a land purchase, what we considered to be an agreement that respected our nationhood. Some other examples. I think it's important to acknowledge, and if we flip quickly back to that first slide, even the one before that, sort of my introduction slide, but actually I did that purposefully. It's a picture, it's an image of our traditional territory, and one of the first teachings I think Uncle shared with me was that our territory, our notion of territory, was defined by our place names in our language. So our territory is well defined, and it includes Southern Gulf Islands, San Juan Islands, all the way across to Point Roberts, and all of the lands and the waters in between. So all of that. And another example of how language expresses our connection to the land, the islands. In our language, we would call Taktechis. That means, that reflects our relationship to those islands as those are our relatives. And there is, from that understanding, from that perspective, there's no way we could surrender or sell or give up our relatives. So there's no way that we would have done that in terms of our relationship to the land. You know, that's our responsibility to uphold and maintain our relationship to those places. And also further to that, I guess, when we look at our territory through the lens of the language, it's important to understand that we didn't make a distinction between land and water. It was, all of it was our territory. I guess to finish, as one example, and if any of you know me and sort of my passion and where my work has led me, you probably think about, oh, that's the guy who writes about the reef net, right? That's probably what you think. But part of that is also intertwined with the reef net, I think, is our concept of ownership of territory. Because while the reef net is a fishing method, a fishing practice, it included ownership of the lands and the waters, and those things passed through hereditary lines, and those things were respected, right? So that's an expression of our concept of ownership and title to the extreme, right? In the article, we just offer a few examples of how we've maintained and resisted European notions of title and sovereignty, and resisted and tried to maintain our conceptions of title and sovereignty, and that continues to today. And the situation up north with the LNG pipeline in the Wet'suwet'en Nation is, again, just an example of that. So I think that's where I'll pause for now, and look forward to our other speakers, and also then engaging in discussion. Asia.